Hello, welcome to another Worm Farm Q&A Live. Today we're going to be discussing type of creatures that can be found in your worm bin. If I fail to mention any that you're aware of, please feel free to share. Some of these I have experience with them being in my worm bin. Some of them are not known to be in my area. So we're going to be discussing quite a few of them. So feel free to share your experience with these creatures in your worm bin. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be talking about is the type of creatures, and then I'm just going to give you a little bit of information on each of these creatures that are insects that can be found in the worm bin. So, just a minute. Okay, so the creatures that you can find are insect. Oh, hi, Russell. So the insects that you can find in your worm bin are fruit flies, earwigs, white mites, red mites, springtails, grain beetle, ants, potworms, slugs, snails, millipede, centipede, and roly-poly. If you're aware of others, please feel free to share. I'd be happy to learn about them as well. Yes. So these are some of the creatures that are insects that can be found in your worm bin. Now, soldier flies, these are very good decomposers and they are actually beneficial to your worm bin. White, oh, hi, mom. White mites, they actually help to keep your bin tidy. They are not harmful to your worms, but too much of them can compete with your worms for the food. And the worms tend to shy away when there are a lot of them in your bins, but they're not harmful to your worms. Red mites, these are actually harmful to your worms. They're actually known as earthworm mites because they are parasites to your worms. So you don't want these in your worm bin. Springtails, these are attracted to mold and decaying matter. And small amount of them is not really harmful to your worms either, but a large amount of them may attack worms that are weaker and they feed on your dead worms as well. When there is too much of these springtails in your worm bin, then it can cause your worms to shy away from the surface. They also carry spores and bacteria that breaks down your vegetables, so they are not really harmful in your worm bin. Potworms, those are these are the ones that I have to deal with the most. Potworms, and the only time I have potworms in my worm bin is when I feed my bin food scraps. In fact, I don't have a lot of any form of insect in my worm bin except when I'm feeding food scraps. So in the last month or two, I have been adding food scraps to some of my worm bins, and I have an increase in pot worms, and I'm seeing quite a few of the white mites as well in my worm bins. The ones that I haven't added food scraps to, they are quite fine. So now I'm thinking maybe I should go back to just feeding them finished compost because I don't want the population to increase. So now I have to be working on getting rid of the pot worms, and a few of the bins have excess white mites. So the pot worms, they're not harmful to your worms. They are actually very good decomposer. The only thing negative about them being in your worm bin is that one, they compete for the food in your bin, and their presence indicate that your bin is either acidic or it has too much moisture. So once you see a lot of potworms in your bin, it means that you have to check your acidity and your moisture level and take whatever steps necessary to control them because they can compete with your worms for the food. Let's see. Are they potworms or nematodes? Yeah, I've been wondering about that, Russell, because potworms are said to grow to about 3/4 of an inch. They don't really go above that, and they're said to look like threads. And I've had potworms before last year. I had quite a lot of them in one of my worm bins, and they really were thread-like. But the worms that I'm seeing now, I see a few of them that does not look like thread. They're actually maybe a 16th or a 32nd of an inch thick, and some of them are actually over an inch long. So I'm actually wondering if they're nematodes. Oh, hi, Sian. Yeah, I'm wondering about that. And prior to last week, I always thought nematodes were some insects. I didn't actually know that they were worms. I was very surprised when I was doing some research on them and find out that they are worms. So I'm going to have to research them some more. Well, I wasn't researching them, I was researching other worms and saw that nematodes are worms. So I'm going to have to research more about them. But why did you ask if they are potworms or nematodes? Are you familiar with having nematodes in worm bins? And if you are, what size do they usually go to, and how do you identify them different from the potworms? Okay, roly poly. That's another creature that can be found in your worm bin. They're not harmful, but their presence mean that you have a little too much moisture in your bin, but they are also very good decomposers. Most of the creatures that you find in your worm bin are actually pretty good decomposers. Earwigs. These, let's see. Oh, hi, Han White. Earwigs love darkness. They're not harmful to your worms, and they are very good decomposers. Let's see. It also says potworms are white worms, segmented. Okay. They're so small I can't even tell if they're segmented. I'd have to put them under a microscope. Um, Hi, Bar Chuckin. Oh, you have potworms in your worm bin. Or is it nematodes you're saying you have in your worm bin, Bar Chuckin? Hi, Vonnie. I recently bought a digital microscope. Whoa, so many creepy crawlies and beetles. Yeah, the funny thing about, oh, you have roly polies. Okay. I saw them a few years ago. My first year, I had them in my outdoor worm bin, but I haven't seen them since. Hi, Melanie. Let's see, what. Yes, Vonnie, you said you see a lot of creepy crawlies in your worm bin when you use your microscope. There's always creatures in your worm bin, and most times you're unaware of them because their population is small and because the creatures themselves are small. But then when things are not too good in the worm bin, or not as good as you'd want it to be, then that is when you start to notice them because their population tend to increase, but they're always there. Yes, we looked at earwigs and we said that they love the darkness. They're not harmful to your worms, and they are very good decomposers. Millipedes, we don't really have them here in Saskatchewan. At least I've never seen any. So I don't know if maybe in other areas where it is moist, if you will find them there, but I've never seen any in my region. These are they are named based on the amount of legs that they have. Each of their body segment has two legs. They're actually beneficial decomposers to your worm bin, but I don't like them because when I used to see them in Jamaica, they used to, if you crush them, they kind of smell bad and they're creepy. But thankfully, I don't have to deal with them here. And the next creature that we have to deal with sometimes, I don't have a problem with them except occasionally in the summer outdoors, I will see them. Melanie said, I watched your beetroot video and it was a big help. Thanks. Oh, you're very welcome. I'm glad it was able to help you. Yes, so soldier flies, I don't really have an issue with them except occasionally I will see them outside in my compost bin, but other than that, I don't really have a problem with them. Oh, hi, Nikki. No, soldier flies, they are nocturnal and they will lay their larvae in your bin. As long as you do not have meat in your bin, then everything is okay. They're very good decomposer and they will deter house flies from entering your bin. They're not harmful and they do not spread disease. So having them in their larvae in your worm bin is actually okay. Now the beneficial insects are the insects that are considered beneficial in your worm bin are the earwigs, the sprigtail, the millipede, and the soldier flies. Insects that are considered to be benign, meaning they're neither harmful nor beneficial, are ants, roly-poly, and hotworms. Let's see. Russell says a common nematode that is found in worm bin is called C. elegans. Oh, I'm gonna have to research those. Let me jot that down. I wonder if that's what I have. because worms that I'm seeing, they don't really look like potworms. They're a little bit too big to be potworms, but I was wondering if maybe the food is that good that they're actually fat. Uh, Melanie asked, will you be doing a strawberry video anytime soon? Yes, I'm actually working on one. I got quite a few of them that I'm working on. Some of them I put part of the information together already, but I still have a lot more to put together. So, yeah, you can stay tuned for that one. Alright, it says I am here planning a lesson. You're always planning lessons, eh? Miss Busy Bee. Okay, ants in your worm bin. They're not harmful and they're not beneficial either. Um, when you see ants in your bin, it's usually an indication that your bin is too dry. The problem with having them in your worm bin is that they compete for the food. And unlike other insects that can be found in your worm bin that will live in your worm bin and just feed, the ants constantly make trips taking food away, so they're not just eating for themselves but they're carrying food for other members of their colony. So because of that, they can seriously compete for the food that is in your worm bin. And so although they're not harmful, you need to get rid of them. Plus, you don't want to be looking after your worm bin and have ants biting you. Stop. Yeah, I know you're a workaholic. Okay, fruit flies. They're not harmful, but they increase their population very quickly. At the moment, I have to deal with quite a few of them in my worm bin. Was trying to extract some worms and use a container with some holes in it and put some food scraps in there. And I went in to look after my worms yesterday, and man, I opened the container and closed it back. I didn't even look after that bin with the worms because there was just too many of them in there. So I'm gonna have to set some trap for them before I go and look at that bin again. Yes, so they're not harmful, but they will increase their population very quickly. And if you have your worm bin in your house, then you have a serious problem. Thankfully, mine is in my garage, but I don't want them in there, so I'm gonna have to get rid of them. Let's see. And why it says those are the worst, the fruit flies. I agree. I will put up with a lot of the others, but the fruit flies, they are not. They're annoying, excuse me. Yes, and just the rate at which they reproduce makes it so terrible. And it's so hard to get rid of them. It's not as if you can use a lot of poison or other stuff for them. Let's see. Centipedes. Okay, we're looking at centipedes. These use venom to incapacitate whatever insect they're preying on, and that includes your worms. So if you have centipedes in your worm bin, then you need to get rid of them. They're also known for biting humans, and although their venom is not enough to do any serious harm, it can sting or burn for quite a while. So you don't really want them in your worm bin because you don't want them preying on your worms and you don't want them biting you as well. Snails and slugs. Although they are not harmful to your worm bin, snails and slugs will actually lay their eggs in your worm bin. And then when you go to use your castings, you're going to end up with an infestation in your garden. So it is best to get rid of these as quickly as possible whenever you find them in your garden, in your worm bin. Now, how do you control? Sorry. Vonnie Bench says, I only had issues with fruit flies in my Canadian nightcrawler bin. Oh, you raise Canadian nightcrawlers. Do you have any difficulty raising Canadian nightcrawlers? Because I've been trying with them for a while and not very successful. My last attempt wasn't too bad because I had them for a little over a year, but then I accidentally neglected the bin for a month and they died. Most of them, I went down from over almost, that was almost 5 dozen worms, and I went down to three because I neglected the bin. Usually, with my red wigglers and my European night crawlers, if I neglect my bin for a month, which very rarely happens, they would be fine. The moisture level in the bin would be pretty low, but they would be fine. But the Canadian night crawlers, they didn't do so well at all. They died from almost 5 dozen down to three worms. Let's see. Hi, AJ. Yes. What is the best way to get rid of leaf miners? I'm not really sure how to get rid of leaf miners because I'm not sure what they are. I've read about them a little, know of their existence, but I don't really know much about them in terms of what they are to be able to say what can get rid of them. Are they little tiny insects? Are they flying insect, crawling insect, worms? What are they? And White says, I have seen slugs in my ENC bin, but not often. Okay, good. Just keep an eye on the population so they don't get too big. I did. Okay. I have a video of their release last fall. They are huge. They were huge. Oh, interesting. What's the name of that video, Bonnie? I'd like to check it out. Yes, so we were looking at slugs and snails, and now we're down to, okay. Yes, so we're going to be discussing how to get rid of these creatures from your worm bin. Uh, Now, before I discuss how to get rid of them, of the creatures that I mentioned that can be found in your worm bin, centipedes, red mites, also known as earthworm mites, snails, and slugs. These are considered very bad for your worm bin, so if you have them, then you have to take whatever steps necessary to get rid of them. Now, how do you get rid of these insects from your garden? There are several methods that you can use. And one is that your bedding, you're going to make sure that you had sufficient bedding to your worm bin on top of your food scraps, covering your food scraps with at least 4 to 6 inches of bedding is a good idea because one, it will control the smell that escapes from your bin. And when I say smell, I don't mean that it smells bad, but a lot of insects like the fruit flies and stuff can smell it and it will attract them. So covering it with bedding helps. YouTube. Okay. Yes, so covering wine and worms. Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Yes, so covering your food scraps with bedding will help to control a lot of these insects in your bin. Also, managing the pH in your worm bin will help to control some of these insects because potworms, mites, and springtails, they actually love acidic environment and their population will increase drastically if your bin is acidic. So once you see them, then you know your bin is acidic. So you need to add some form of buffer to the bin in order to control them. And some buffers that you can use to control the acidity in your bin are things like dolomite lime, you can use eggshells, you can use diatomaceous earth, and the eggshell has to be crushed fine. If you put them in your bin large, it's going to take a very long time to break down, and it doesn't really benefit your worms. It will benefit, well, it benefits your worm, but only in one way because it will control the acidity. But if you crush it fine, then it also serve as a roughage for your worms because, as you may know, the worms don't have teeth and they process food through their gizzard. So if you crush the eggshell, then it will help them to digest their food faster. Let's see, Melanie says the leaf miner, it's a worm that grows inside leaf, the leaf beets, radishes, etc. Okay, okay, interesting. I'm gonna have to do some research on those then. Let me jot that down as well. Leaf miners. Okay, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to do some research on that one. Okay, yes. So diatomaceous earth or crushed oyster shells, these will help to reduce the acidity in your bin. Any of you ever had to deal with any of these creatures in your bin, and what method do you use to control them, or do you just let them be? Oh, hi, LP. Happy Friday to you as well. Okay, so for things like, let's see, what Rosa says, if I get an infestation of unlikable mites, I use the mites from my breeders. They eat them for breakfast, lunch, dinner, worm bins, or plants. I call them mighty mites. Okay, yes. So, things like mites and potworm, if you get a slice of bread and you soak it in milk and just put it on the surface of your bin, it will actually attract the mites and the potworms, and they will just go on it to feed, and you can just take that out and get rid of them. It won't kill them, but it will help you to remove them from your bin, and you just keep repeating the process until you have drastically reduced the population. You can also get a sheet of paper, damp or soaked in milk, and put it on the surface. Same process like with the bread and milk, and the creatures will go on it, and you just simply remove them. Or you can use a torch and torch the creatures after they go on top of the bread or the paper, but you need to be careful. If you have a lot of worms on your surface, then that is not a good option. Sometimes when you're removing the potworms, you may lose a few hatchlings in the process, but sometimes it is necessary in order to control your worm population. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Neem oil or neem cake is also good for eradicating mites. Let's see. AJ says, I try to feed my Android phone to my worms on accident. Do you think that do you think they would prefer the Apple phone instead? Who knows? Maybe. Yeah. Um, I don't know if they would eat the Android, but they might eat the Apple. Yes, and wife says the Apple as well. When you find out, let me know what the answer is, okay? Um, yes. So if you have too much of these creature in your bin, a lot of times you will find that there is a little something off in your bin. So whether it is acidic, it is too moist, maybe you have too much food in the bin and the worms can't eat it fast enough, or the bin could be too dry. Now, if that is the case, then you just have to either reduce the feeding or increase the moisture in the moisture level in the bin, or decrease it. Stop feeding if you have too much food in your worm bin. There are a lot of unprocessed food in your bin, and worms can feed on that. Worms can actually go a good little while without food, so you don't really have to worry about them dying. The smaller creatures will die more readily than the worms, so you can stop feeding for a while and let the worms work on whatever unprocessed food is there, and that will help. Apple phones has less bugs. I agree with you, Vonnie. They will have less bugs indeed. Okay, yes. Too much food in your worm bin will increase acidity in your bin as well, which is why most of the time you'll end up with all those insects that love acid when you feed food scraps to your bin. A good idea is also to keep your bin aerated because that will help to reduce the level of acidity in your bin, because once your food scraps become stagnant, it is going to become acidic. Even if it wasn't acidic food that you put in your bin, once it becomes anaerobic, it becomes acidic. So keeping your bin aerated is a good idea, a good way of controlling the acidity in your bin and thus controlling some of these acid loving creatures. Don't overwater your bin. Constantly monitor the amount of moisture in your bin. Some people like to keep their bin on the moisture side. Some people like to keep it on the drier side. You have to know what works best for your bin. So you're gonna have to play around with it for a while. See what happens when you keep your bin on the drier side, or what happens when you keep it on the wetter side. Um, One thing though, if you keep your bin on the drier side, your worm population does not increase as much as when you keep it on the moisture side. So you have to keep that in mind. LP says, I have the most mites in my blue worm bins and they get the most food. It's not crazy, but I'm keeping an eye on things. Okay, my blue bin is drier, excuse me, is drier than my ANC and red bin. Oh, okay. Yeah, I notice my wetter bins tend to have more of these creatures, but it is only the bins that I feed food scraps that actually have a good, reasonable population of these mites. I have the little white mites, and potworms are possibly nematodes. Thankfully, so far, I haven't seen much other creatures apart from the disgusting fruit flies. If you have fruit flies in your bin, covering your bin with mesh, a window screen is a good idea, but keeping your bin covered with something that doesn't have any holes in it large enough for the fruit flies to get in is a good idea. They are a bit trickier to get rid of than the other creatures in your worm bin. So what you can do is get a container with soap and vinegar. So you can make a soap water solution and put that with vinegar close to the worm bin, or just vinegar diluted in water. And that helps. Let me see. LP says, I have a lot of those little brown or orange color mites. Those you need to get rid of, LP. Those little pests will actually bother your worms. So those you definitely have to try and make sure you control the population of them. I put a glue trap on top of the paper bag, on top of the red worm bin. It is not covered in some, no, it is not covered in some teeny tiny little dark bugs. I have no idea what it is. I need a magnifying glass to see. Thanks. Okay, you're welcome. Yes, using a sticky tape is a good idea. You can just put it on the outside of your bin. So if you set up a vinegar solution, it's done anything that is sour or fruity will attract fruit flies. So you can set up the vinegar solution. Don't put it in your worm bin because it will harm your worms. So keep it outside of your worm bin. Make sure you have it covered where there are just tiny holes that the flies can get in, but it would be difficult for them to get out. That's a good idea. And then you can put your sticky traps on the outside of your bin. I don't recommend putting your sticky traps inside your bin because your worms can go on it and get stuck. And we're trying to get rid of the flies and not the worms. So yes, don't use it in your worm bin. All right, so I have covered all of what I wanted to discuss for today. So if you have anything that you'd like to talk about your worm farm, go ahead. And if you know of any type of pest or insects in your worm bin that I haven't mentioned here, or if you're familiar with these ones and you use different methods to get rid of them, then please feel free to share. Oh, yeah, I figured it should have been no. AJ says, I have to go. Keep up the great work. Stay safe and healthy, everyone. Okay, same to you, AJ, and thanks for stopping by. Sigourney says, is there a glossary of different pests that gets into the worm bin? I don't really know if there's a glossary of it, but if you search online, you should be able to find information on the various types of pests that get in the worm bin. Rodents are another thing that can affect your worm bin. Rats and other mice and other creatures. So you have to know what is in your region, because in my location I don't really have rats, but I have mice, and they do go in my worm bin if I feed my worms food scraps, which is why I mostly focus on finished compost, because I don't have to deal with these pests when I'm feeding finished compost, only when I feed food scraps. So there are lots of things that are pests that can get into your worm bin. So it's a good idea you could do some research on that. Let's see. LP says, okay, have a good one, AJ. Okay. Yes. All right. So do you have any questions, or is there anything you'd like to talk about? Out of these creatures or whatever insects that I mentioned, do you have any of these in your worm bin? I do have pictures of some of these creatures. I did a video on this topic. I did a video on this topic about creatures in your worm bin. So maybe you can look that up because it has pictures of each of the creatures that I mentioned in it. LP says, my temperatures are dropping here for the week. My worms are in the basement, but the basement does not stay warm. I need to devise a plan to keep them warmer. Any suggestions? You can. Hi, T. Trenton. I'll get back to you, T. Trenton. I'm just going to answer LP's question here. Any suggestion on keeping them warmer? You can get one of those little plug-in heater and put it in the center of your bins, because I think you have 3 bins, so you can just put it close to them, or get thick blankets and cover them over. That would work. If you have, maybe you can get styrofoam in your location to buy 2-inch thick or thicker, and just use that. Put it on the ground. You want to put it on the ground because you don't want that cold air coming up from the ground to enter into your bin. So make sure you have them elevated off the floor, and the thick blanket will work. You can even use the styrofoam to create something like a box around the bins. Okay, so T. Trenton says, I started with 1 pound of red wrigglers 3 years ago. Now I got over 30 pounds of worms. Should I make some videos? By all means, why not? Yeah, go ahead, it's fun. And I'm sure there are a lot of beginners out there who would like to see those videos and see what you're up to. LP says, thank you. I have them on a shelf about 16 inches off the ground. Good, good, yes. So Trenton, are you planning to raise any other worms apart from red wrigglers? All right, so while I'm waiting for that, so I'm gonna be bringing this live to a close pretty soon. If there are no more questions or comments. Oh, you actually have African night crawlers. You must be in a warm location. Do you get cold winters where you are? How do you keep those African night crawlers warm? CLP says, I have juice left over from pickle beets and was thinking of adding to my worm bin that is too alkaline. Do you think that would harm them? The thing is, pickle usually contains salt. I don't know if you pickled it yourself. I don't know if you pickle it yourself and how much salt you have in there, but the worms don't like salt. And if your bin is too acidic, Sorry, if your bin is too alkaline, you could always add acidic food to it to help to bring it up. Something that I started doing last year is not necessarily for my worm bin, but the same principle could apply in your case. Is like all of my acidic food, whenever I have them, the food scraps, I create a compost bin for them. So just a bucket that I compost them in, and just grind them down into powder. Or if it is things like orange peel and any member of the citrus family, I just dry them and grind them down into a powder. And then I just add them to an environment if I want that to make that environment acidic. So if your bin is too alkaline, then those are two options that you could use. I wouldn't necessarily use the pickle juice because it's going to contain the vinegar and it's going to contain salt, and neither of those are good for your worms. Oh, your aunt did. Okay. Trent says he's from Ohio and it's cold. Okay. I have them in my basement about 70 degrees, and I use old plants for their bedding from my local nursery. Okay, okay, that should be fine then. Well, pieces. Oh, good idea. I have added lime rind so far. Okay, good. Russell says, I bought a yard of compost, made worm bedding, went to use it, and it smelled like ammonia. Went from 7 pounds to 2.5 pounds in 2 weeks. Dios míos. Wow. Yeah. The next week, I started using pond enzymes. Problem solved. Nice. Yeah, that's crazy. So that's the thing, because when you buy compost, you don't really know what it is that you are getting. You just know it is compost, but you don't know what material they composted. Sorry about that. I'm hearing voices that I'm not familiar with, so I'm just listening to hear what that. If it's outside, yes. Okay. So that my hobby is home. Yes. So that's the thing with compost. You don't really know what it is that they composted, so you're not really sure what you're getting unless it is specified when you buy your compost, which is why I like to feed my worms the compost that I make, because I know exactly what is in it. And then a lot of the compost that is made from animal dung, they can be rich in nitrogen or ammonia, so we have to be careful with that. I'm glad the pond enzyme was able to solve the problem for you. Did you ask the nursery for those plants? Okay, you're asking Trent. Let's see, Russell says, oh gosh, I started red beans with about 85 or so worms, and about a week later, it smelled like ammonia. I've been working on reversing it because I don't want to start it over. Okay. When you started your that bin with the 85 or so worms LP, what is it that you were using in the bin? Were you using compost as well? Let's see, Trenton says yes, I asked the local nurseries. Oh, okay, nice. I wonder. Do you, when you ask them for, is it plants that the nurseries don't no longer want for whatever reason that they give you to use in your worm bin? The ammonia means no good. I figure as much, yeah. Too much, the worms can't deal with that. Trenton says, very good. I heard of people going to cafes for coffee, but never to nurseries. You know, I've never really thought of that actually. Never thought of going to nurseries for stuff like that. Yeah. I used to go to a restaurant for food scraps to make compost, and I would get coffee grounds in there, but I've never really been to locations specifically for coffee grounds. I used to get coffee grounds, food scraps, and eggshells. But since the COVID start, I haven't been able to. Well, I could keep going, but I don't really want to. Better safe than sorry. It says, no, I did not use any compost. I use yard waste, shredded paper, cardboard. The problem is I overfed. Oh, okay. Yeah. They transplant and save the old soil for me. That's nice. That's nice. Yeah. Here, it is not even easy to get food scraps from most of the supermarkets and restaurants and stuff, because when you go to them they tell you that they have a location where they take it to be composted, so a lot of them are not willing to give it to you. And then I think maybe because if you're going to get it from inside the supermarket, people can actually put groceries into the containers and pretend that it is all food scraps. I don't know if that is why they're not willing to share, but a lot of the restaurants and supermarkets are not really willing to share. But it's a good idea. Try in the nursery to see if you can get those used plants. See, the smell has gone down drastically. I added a lot of crushed oyster shell and cut back on food. I also had more acidic food. I am sure some of the worms died, but so far they seem to be rebounding. Well, that's great. That's good. Melanie says, what's the difference between regular earthworms and the one you raise? Good question. Regular earthworms, they're not good composting worms. One, they don't live in their food scraps, they will live in the soil, and then they come up to feed, or they come up and take the food down to wherever they're living. They don't reproduce very fast. They they don't do well in confinement. They are burrowers, so they like to live deep down in the soil. So they don't make good composting worms. The ones that we raise for compost, they like to live in the material that they're feeding on. They are mostly surface dwellers. So the ENCs, they may live below the food scraps, but they won't be living far from the food scraps. The red wigglers, these ones will live in the food scraps, and you usually find them within the first 2 to 6 inches of material that is on the surface. If you have food scraps right throughout the bin, however, then they will live right throughout the material. Earthworms, regular earthworms, they don't do well when you put them in confinement. They will always try to burrow down into the container, and because of that, sometimes they even harm themselves, even to the point of death. So it's not a good idea to use them as compost worms. They will not survive. When I go to my local landscaper supply, I feel like a kid in a candy store. Found it best to stick with worm peat, red sedge, marsh grass. Okay, never really heard of that one. See, that's why I like doing these lives because you learn so much, so much to learn. Yeah, kid in a candy store. I can just imagine. Oh Lord, I can just see you looking at all those stuff. Oh, should I get this one? Should I get that one? Yeah, I don't know. Anything to do with worms. My husband says, hmm, everything is about your worms, isn't it? He was making his wine the other day and after straining out the dregs, I was like, what do you do with the dregs? He says, I throw it out. I'm like, but my worms could eat that. He says, everything is always about your worms. If you have a piece of paper, I'm like, are you going to use that? I see you with a cardboard box. I'm like, can I have that? Yeah, I don't know. Raising worms, it's fun. It's lots of fun. Let's see. You guys make me want to visit a nursery soon. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Melanie. LP. I was thinking the same thing. Melanie says, great to know. Yeah. Joy says, so much to learn on this channel. Oh, thank you, Mom. Yeah, I don't know. I love the worm farming. Love it. It's actually very relaxing. Sometimes, if I don't have anything to do and it's not cold outside, I will just go and sit and just look at my worms. Just sit there looking at them, not doing anything more than just looking at them. Sometimes I go and look, is the number increasing? Are they eating up the food scraps? What is it? Are they making a lot of castings? Are there eggs in there? I wonder how much eggs are in there. I don't know. I just find them quite interesting. Yeah. Let's see. LP says, you'll have to document your trip to the nursery if you go. That's a good idea. I'd have to get their permission though. A lot of people might not like you videoing them. Although you could do a video without showing their faces or stuff like that. But it's a good idea. A lot of people like to do food shopping haul or gardening shopping haul. So I guess going to the nursery for things from a worm would be a nice little haul. Yeah, so if there are no more questions or comments, I think I'm going to be bringing this live to a close. I really enjoy talking with you guys. I can tell Han White is pretty busy with her lesson planning. She's quiet, and that's okay. We know how it goes. We're always busy. Yeah, so thank you guys for participating in the live. Let's see. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Yeah, same to you, Han White. Yes, it was really nice talking to you guys. So thank you for being here. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Ever hear about how they ship all over by train? This is so true. Interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah, so anyway, guys, stay safe and I will see you again on Monday. Thank you so much. Good chat as always. Okay, thank you, LP. Okay. Bye, Melanie. And I'm signing out now.